Establish a ticking clock, internal debate between safety and heroics, a sudden physical intervention, and a whispered revelation. Grace had exactly one heartbeat to decide. One heartbeat before the red laser, currently dancing across the expensive silk of the man's collar, moved to the center of his forehead. She could drop the tray of kimchi, duck behind the mahogany serving station, and pray the gunman ignored a simple waitress, or she could throw away her anonymity and dive into the line of fire for a man who didn't even know her name. She didn't let herself think. As she stepped toward the table of Nam Tae-jun, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Tae-jun didn't look up. He was the image of untouchable authority, his hand steady as he held his bowl of noodles. Before her courage could fail, Grace lunged. She didn't just move. She collided with him, her red silk apron fluttering as she threw her weight against his expensive black jacket. Hey, besties. Welcome to Clemency Love Stories. If you're ready to see a corporate bully get what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Is it morning or night for you? Now let's get back to the takedown. The world seemed to freeze. Tae-jun didn't flinch, even as they went down. His expression remained perfectly controlled, his dark, deep eyes locking onto hers with a chilling intensity as they hit the floor. "Don't move," she whispered, her face inches from his, her breath hitching. "There's a sniper. They're aiming for your heart." The male lead reacts with calm amusement/dominance. A physical claim is made, the secondary villain's reaction is noted, and the environment explodes into chaos. For a second, Tae-jun remained perfectly still beneath her. But instead of the shock she expected, a slow, predatory smile touched his lips. He looked amused, as if death were an old friend he invited to dinner. "Dangerous," she shuddered, her hands trembling against his chest. Then she felt it, the subtle shift in his body, muscle tightening like a coiled spring beneath his jacket. His hand moved to her waist, his grip firm and proprietary, pinning her against him to ensure she couldn't pull away.
Danger.
This man was pure danger. The relaxed, dark look in his eyes said it all. When she tried to scramble back, his grip tightened, pulling her flush against him. "I saw the Grace," Nam Tae-jun murmured, his voice a low, smooth vibration in her ear that made her skin prickle. "But do you have any idea what you've just gotten yourself into by touching me?" Grace's heart stopped. Across the room, his business partner's face had gone ghostly pale. The man's eyes darted toward the exit, his hand twitching beneath the table. The tension in the air became thick enough to choke on. The engine of the black sedan hummed like a growling beast as it sped away from the bright lights of the city. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of expensive leather and the metallic tang of blood. Grace sat huddled against the door, her hands trembling in her lap. She kept sneaking glances at the man beside her. Tae-jun looked like a statue carved from ice. His jaw was set tight, and a dark stain was spreading across the side of his dress shirt, soaking through the fine fabric. "You're bleeding," Grace whispered, her voice cracking. "There was a hospital 2 miles back. We should turn around." Tae-jun didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the dark road ahead. "No hospitals," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "Hospitals have records. Records lead to questions I don't want to answer." "But you'll faint if you lose too much blood," she cried, her panic rising. She reached out a hand as if to help, but he flinched away, his eyes snapping toward her with a look so sharp it felt like a physical blow. "Don't touch me," he barked. Grace pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. She sank deeper into the plush seat, feeling smaller than she ever had before. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew he wasn't someone who took no for an answer. The car turned off the main highway and began to climb a winding path up a steep hill. Tall trees leaned over the road, blocking out the moonlight. Eventually, they reached a high iron gate that slid open silently. Behind it sat a house made of glass and concrete, hidden away from the rest of the world. It looked cold and lonely, much like the man driving the car. Tae-jun parked and stepped out. For a second, he swayed, his hand gripping the car door for support, but he quickly straightened up. He didn't wait for her. Grace had no choice but to follow him inside. The house was freezing. The floors were polished stone, and there were no photos on the walls, no rugs on the floor, and no signs that anyone actually lived there. It felt more like a cage than a home. He led her into a large room with a single chair placed right in the middle. He pointed to it. "Sit," he commanded. Grace sat. The chair was hard and uncomfortable. Taejun walked over to a small cabinet and pulled out a medical kit. He sat on the edge of a desk nearby, wincing as he peeled back his shirt to reveal the jagged wound on his side. He began to clean it himself, his face pale but his hands steady. The silence in the room was heavy. The only sound was the ticking of a clock somewhere in the shadows. "Who sent you?" he asked suddenly. He didn't look up from his wound. "Nobody sent me," Grace said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I told you at the restaurant. I was just there for my shift. I'm a waitress, Taejun. I don't know anything about shooters or gangs." Taejun finally looked at her. He leaned forward, the light from the ceiling hitting the sharp angles of his face. A simple waitress doesn't end up in the middle of a hit job by accident. You were standing right there. You saw their faces. And yet, you're still breathing. That makes me wonder. "It was a mistake," Grace insisted. Tears began to sting her eyes. "I was just scared. I saw you were hurt and I reacted. I didn't think. I just didn't want anyone to die." Taejun stood up and walked toward her. He moved slowly, like a predator circling its prey. He stopped just inches away, looking down at her. He looked for any sign of a lie in her eyes, any flicker of guilt. Grace didn't look away. She was terrified, but she was telling the truth, and she hoped he could see that. "If I find out you are lying to me, Grace," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "there is nowhere you can hide. You are in my world now. And in my world, trust is more expensive than gold." He stared at her for a long time. The coldness in the room seemed to seep into Grace's bones. She realized then that her life had changed forever. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness, a prisoner, and a puzzle that Taejun wasn't finished solving. He turned away and walked toward the window, leaving her shivering in the cold seat, wondering if she would ever see the sun again. Taejun stood by the window for a long time, watching the shadows of the trees dance on the glass. He felt the sting in his side where he had stitched the wound, but the pain in his head was worse. He couldn't make sense of the girl sitting behind him. Usually, people wanted something from him. They wanted his money, his power, or his life. But Grace just sat there, her shoulders slumped and her white apron covered in dark red stains. He turned around and walked back toward her. He noticed the way she flinched when he got close. She wasn't acting like a trained spy. She was shaking so hard that her teeth made a tiny clicking sound. He looked down at the blood on her clothes. It wasn't her blood. It was his. She had used her own body to shield him in the restaurant, and she hadn't even asked for $1 in return. "Take off the apron," he said. His voice was a bit softer now, though still firm. Grace blinked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What?" "It is covered in blood," Taejun said, pointing to the fabric. "It is a mess. I will get you something clean to wear." Grace fumbled with the strings at her waist. Her fingers were stiff from the cold and the shock. She struggled with a knot at her back, her face turning red with the effort. Without saying a word, Taejun stepped behind her. Grace froze as she felt his large, warm hands move near her neck. He quickly untied the knot and pulled the stained apron away. As the heavy fabric fell to the floor, Taejun stopped. Grace was wearing a thin, short-sleeved shirt underneath. On her pale arms, there were thin, white lines, scars that didn't come from tonight. They were old marks, some jagged and some straight, telling a story of a life that had been very hard long before he met her. He reached out and lightly touched a scar near her elbow. Grace jumped, as if she had been hit. She quickly pulled her sleeves down, trying to hide her arms, but it was too late. Taejun had seen them. He realized then that she hadn't saved him because she was brave or because she wanted a reward. She had saved him because she knew what it felt like to be hurt, and her instinct was to stop it from happening to someone else. "How did you get these?" he asked. His voice wasn't cold anymore. It was curious. Grace looked at the floor, her voice barely a whisper. Life isn't easy for everyone, Mr. Kong. Some of us have to fight just to get through the day. Taejun felt a strange tug in his chest. He had spent his whole life thinking he was the only one who had survived a war. He thought everyone else was soft and greedy. But looking at this girl, he saw a different kind of strength. She didn't have guns or guards, but she was still standing. He walked over to a closet and pulled out a thick, black sweater. He tossed it to her. Put this on. You are shivering. Grace caught the sweater. It was soft and smelled like expensive soap and wood smoke. She pulled it over her head, and it was so big on her that the sleeves covered her hands completely. She looked up at him, and for the first time, the terror in her eyes faded just a little bit. I didn't do it for the money, she said, her voice getting stronger. I didn't even know who you were. I just saw a man who was about to die. Taejun sat in the chair across from her. He studied her face, noticing the exhaustion under her eyes. He had brought her here to interrogate her, to break her down until she told him who sent her. But there was nothing to break. She was just a girl who had been through too much, yet she still had enough heart left to save a stranger. I believe you, he said quietly. The words seemed to take the air out of the room. Grace let out a long breath she had been holding for hours. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She just nodded. Taejun watched her, realizing that by bringing her to this safe house, he hadn't just put her in danger, he had let someone into his world who might actually be able to see the man behind the mask. He wasn't sure if that thought made him feel safe or more afraid than he had ever been. The quiet of the house was broken by a low, buzzing sound. Taejun's eyes darted to a small screen on the wall. It showed the front gate. Two dark SUVs were parked right outside, their headlights cutting through the mist like the eyes of angry giants. On the side of the vehicles was a small, red mark shaped like a claw. The Iron Tigers, Taejun muttered. His face turned back into a mask of cold stone. Grace stood up, the oversized black sweater falling down to her knees. Who was that? Did they follow us? Stay down, Taejun ordered. He didn't wait for her to answer. He moved to a drawer and pulled out a heavy silver handgun. He checked the bullets with a quick, practiced click. They didn't follow us. Someone talked. This house was supposed to be a secret. Outside, the heavy iron gates groaned as the SUVs rammed into them. The sound of metal twisting echoed through the glass walls of the house. Grace scrambled into a corner, hiding behind the thick stone kitchen counter. Her heart felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. She had saved this man's life, and now more people were coming to finish the job. A loud voice boomed from a speaker outside.
Daeyeon.
We know you are in there with the girl. Give her to us, and maybe we will let you live. She saw too much at the restaurant. The Tigers don't like witnesses. Taejun looked at Grace. For a split second, his eyes softened. He saw her huddled on the floor, her small hands over her ears. She was a waitress who liked to help people, not a target for a gang. He turned back to the door, his grip tightening on his weapon. They want to pay a debt, Taejun said, mostly to himself. But they're asking the wrong person. The front door exploded inward. Glass shattered into 1,000 tiny diamonds that rained down on the polished floor. 3 men in heavy leather jackets stepped through the smoke. They held short, black guns, and looked around the room with mean smiles. Where is she, Taejun? The leader asked. He was a big man with a scar running across his nose. Hand over the girl and the money you owe the Tigers for the mess at the restaurant. Taejun stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He didn't look scared at all. He looked bored. I don't owe you anything, he said coolly. In fact, you broke my door. That is very expensive. We'll take it out of your hide then, the leader growled. He raised his gun, but Taejun was faster. The room filled with the roar of gunfire. Grace squeezed her eyes shut and screamed, pressing her back against the cold stone of the counter. She heard the sound of glass breaking, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor, and the sharp crack-crack of Taejun's pistol. It felt like the world was ending. Then, everything went silent. Grace waited, her breath coming in short gasps. She smelled smoke and something sour. She slowly opened her eyes and peeked over the edge of the counter. Taejun was standing in the middle of the room. The three men were on the floor, not moving. Taejun wasn't even sweating. He walked over to the leader, who was clutching his leg and groaning in pain. Taejun looked down at him. "You wanted gold for your troubles?" he asked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, shiny brass bullet casing. He dropped it onto the man's chest. "I decided to pay you in lead instead. It's much heavier." He turned his back on the men and walked toward the kitchen. He reached down and held out a hand to Grace. His palm was calloused and steady. Grace looked at his hand, then up at his face. He had just killed men to protect her, but he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who was tired of fighting. "We have to go," he said. "More will come. This place isn't safe anymore." Grace took his hand. He pulled her up easily, his strength surprising her. She looked at the mess in the beautiful house, the broken glass, the blood, and the ruined furniture. She realized that Taejun was right. The Iron Tigers wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling. Taejun led her toward the back garage, where a faster, smaller car was waiting. "Somewhere they can't find us. Somewhere the Tigers are afraid to go." As they drove out of the back exit and into the dark woods, Grace looked at her hands. They were still shaking, but she felt a strange sense of safety next to the man in the driver's seat. He was dangerous, yes, but he was the only thing standing between her and the dark. She leaned back into the seat and watched the safe house disappear in the rearview mirror, knowing that there was no going back to her old life. The car stopped in front of a tall, modern building in the heart of the city. This place was different from the safe house. It was bright, filled with security guards in suits, and felt like a fortress made of steel. Taejun didn't speak as he led Grace up a private elevator to a huge apartment at the very top. Inside, the walls were covered in silk, and the windows showed the entire city glowing like a box of jewels. "Wait here," Taejun said. He vanished into another room, leaving Grace alone in the middle of a rug that felt softer than a cloud. A few minutes later, two women walked in. They were carrying racks of beautiful clothes, dresses made of velvet, silk blouses, and coats that looked like they cost more than Grace made in a year. They didn't say a word. They simply began measuring Grace, holding up fabrics against her skin and nodding to each other. Grace felt like a doll being dressed up for a show. When they were finished, a sleek black dress hung on the door. It was simple but elegant, with a small silver pin shaped like a dragon on the collar. Taejun walked back into the room, now wearing a fresh suit. He looked at the dress, then at Grace. "The Iron Tigers think you are a witness I am trying to hide," he said, his voice calm and steady. "As long as they think that, they will never stop hunting you. We need to change the story." Grace touched the soft fabric of the dress. "Change the story? How?" Taejun walked over to a desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. He laid it flat on the table. "The Tigers have a spy inside my organization. That is how they found the safe house. I need to find out who it is. To do that, I need a distraction. I need everyone to look at you, so they don't see what I am doing." He pushed the paper toward her. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Partnership Agreement." "I want the world to believe you aren't a witness," he explained. "I want them to think you are my fiancé. If you are the future wife of Taejun Kong, the Tigers won't dare touch you in public, and the traitor will be forced to make a move to stop our wedding from happening." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the paper. It was a contract. It said she would live in his house, attend parties at his side, and play the part of a woman in love. In exchange, he would keep her safe, pay off all her family's debts, and give her a new life when it was over. "This is crazy," Grace whispered. "I'm a waitress. I don't know how to act like a princess. People will see right through me." "Dayon, step closer." He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind her ear. His touch was light, but his eyes were intense. "You saved my life because you couldn't stand to see someone get hurt. That kind of heart cannot be taught. You don't need to act, Grace. You just need to stand by me. I will handle the rest." Grace looked at the dragon pin on the dress. The dragon was a symbol of power and protection. She looked at the scars on her arms, hidden beneath the sleeves of his large sweater. She had spent her whole life being afraid of the dark. For the first time, someone was offering her a way to fight back. What happens if the traitor finds out the truth? She asked. They won't, Taejun promised. Because for as long as this contract lasts, I will treat you as the most important person in my world. Nobody will doubt it. Grace picked up a pen. Her hand shook for a second, but then she thought about the men with the guns and the way Taejun had stood in front of her. She signed her name at the bottom of the page. Taejun took the paper and nodded. The deal was done. He handed her the black dress. Get ready. We have a dinner to attend tonight. It is time to show the world my new fiancé. As Grace took the dress, she realized she wasn't just wearing new clothes.
She was putting on a mask.
She went into the dressing room, leaving her old life behind on the floor like a pile of dusty rags. When she emerged, she wasn't the girl from the restaurant anymore. She was the dragon's mark, and the game had finally begun. The morning sun hit the glass walls of the apartment, but it didn't feel warm. Taejun stood in the center of a wide, empty room that he used for training. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket today. His sleeves were rolled up, showing the steady muscles of his arms. On the table in front of him sat a heavy, black handgun. It looked cold and mean under the bright lights. Come here, Grace, he said. Grace walked forward. Her new silk dress felt strange against her skin. She felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. She looked at the gun and felt a shiver go down her spine. I don't think I can do this, she whispered. I've never even held a kitchen knife to someone. I can't hold that. The contract says I will protect you, Taejun said, his voice calm but firm. But there may be a second when I am not there. In that second, you must be your own shield. Pick it up. Grace reached out. Her fingers trembled as she touched the metal. It was heavier than she expected. She lifted it, and her arm wobbled under the weight. Taejun stepped behind her. He didn't touch her at first, but his presence was like a wall of heat. Don't fight the weight, he coached. Let your bones support it. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to use it. He reached around and adjusted her grip, his large hands guiding her smaller ones. Hold it like you mean it. If you hold it with fear, the gun will know. It will jump out of your hands. Grace took a deep breath. She tried to imagine the men from the safe house. She tried to remember the sound of the glass breaking. Slowly, her hand stopped shaking. Good, Taejun said. He moved to stand in front of her. He wasn't holding a weapon, but he looked just as dangerous. Now look at me. Grace raised the gun, pointing it toward a target on the wall behind him. But Taejun stepped directly into her line of sight. Lowering your eyes is the first way to lose a fight, he said. The Iron Tigers and the traitors in my house use fear like a tool. They want to see you blink. They want to see you look at the floor. If you look away, you are telling them they have already won. Grace tried to look him in the eye, but it was hard. His gaze was so intense it felt like he was reading every secret she had ever kept. She felt her eyelids flutter, wanting to look down at her shoes. Keep your eyes on mine, Taejun commanded. Think of the people who gave you those scars on your arms. Did you look away then? Grace's heart skipped a beat. The memory of her past flashed through her mind. The cold nights, the mean words, and the people who thought they could break her because she was quiet. A spark of anger lit up inside her chest. It was a small spark, but it was enough. She lifted her chin. She stared straight into Taejun's dark eyes and didn't move a muscle. The silence lasted for a long time. Taejun didn't move, and neither did she. For the first time, she wasn't just a waitress or a victim. She was someone standing her ground. Taejun's lips pulled back into a very tiny, almost hidden smile. There, he said softly. That is the look of a woman who belongs at my side. A killer wants to see a prey. If you look back at them like you are the one in charge, they will hesitate. And in our world, hesitation is the difference between life and death. He reached out and took the gun back from her. He put it on safety and set it on the table. You learned fast today. You have a spine of steel, Grace. You just didn't know it was there. Grace let out a long breath and slumped her shoulders. The strength she had felt just a moment ago faded, but it didn't disappear completely. She looked at her hands. They were steady. I'm still scared, she admitted. Fear is fine, Taejun said as he walked toward the door. Fear keeps you sharp. Just never let them see it. He paused at the doorway and looked back at her. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we meet the people who want to destroy us. You need to be ready to look them in the eye just like you looked at me. As he left the room, Grace stood in the sunlight. She realized that Tae-jun wasn't just teaching her how to fight. He was teaching her how to survive. She looked at the target on the wall and realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She was learning how to save herself. The grand apartment was silent as the clock struck midnight. The city lights below looked like thousands of tiny stars, but inside, the air felt soft and calm for the first time. Tae-jun had dismissed the guards and the staff. He stood in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, moving with a quiet grace that had nothing to do with fighting. On the marble counter sat 2 plates of pasta. It was the same meal Grace had been serving at the restaurant when the world fell apart. The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the room, replacing the cold scent of gun oil and old stone. You made this? Grace asked, stepping into the warm light of the kitchen. She was still wearing the black dress, but she had kicked off her high heels. I remember you saying it was the best thing on the menu before the glass broke, Tae-jun said. He didn't look at her as he set a fork down. We never got to finish the night. I don't like leaving things unfinished. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table near the window. There were no cameras here, no traitors, and no iron tigers. For a moment, they weren't a boss and a witness or a fake couple. They were just 2 people eating dinner in the middle of the night. Grace took a bite and closed her eyes. It tasted like home, or at least the home she wished she had. It's perfect, she whispered. Tae-jun watched her eat. The hard lines of his face seemed to melt away in the candlelight. Tell me about the girl before the scars, he said softly. The one who didn't have to carry a gun. Grace looked down at her plate. She liked to read. She wanted to travel to places where the sun stayed up all night. She thought she could save everyone. She looked up, a small, sad smile on her lips. I guess some things don't change. I still tried to save you. You did save me, Tae-jun said. His voice was thick with a feeling he couldn't quite name. Many people have tried to take my life, Grace. But you're the only one who ever tried to give it back to me. He reached across the table. This time, Grace didn't flinch. She let him take her hand. His palm was warm and his grip was gentle. He traced the lines of her palm, his eyes fixed on her hand, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. The air between them changed. It wasn't the heavy, scary tension of the training room. It was something else, a pull that made Grace's heart beat faster than it had during the shootout. Tae-jun stood up, never letting go of her hand, and walked around the table. Grace stood to meet him. She had to look up a long way to see his eyes. Up close, he didn't look like a king or a killer. He looked like someone who had been lonely for a very long time. The contract says we have to make them believe we are in love, he whispered. His face was only inches from hers. But there is no one here to watch us now. I know, Grace breathed. Tae-jun leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. But Grace didn't move. She reached up and rested her hands on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath his shirt. When his lips finally met hers, it wasn't like the movies. It was quiet and deep. It tasted like the salt of her tears and the heat of the midnight air. It was a promise that for this one night, the world outside didn't exist. There was no blood, no debt, and no danger. There was only the 2 of them, holding onto each other in the dark, finding a strange kind of peace in the middle of a war. When they finally pulled apart, Tae-jun rested his forehead against hers. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. The silence said everything. Grace realized then that she wasn't just wearing his mark anymore. She was starting to understand the man who wore it, too. The ballroom was a sea of gold and white light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a glow over the wealthy men and women who moved like colorful birds across the floor. Grace felt the weight of the silk dress and the heavy diamond necklace around her neck. Beside her, Tae-jun walked with his head held high. He kept one hand firmly on the small of her back. To anyone watching, they were the perfect couple, but Grace could feel the tension in his muscles. He was a hunter waiting for a trap to snap shut. Keep your head up, Taejun whispered as they walked toward a large stage where a man was selling expensive paintings. The person we are looking for is in this room. They think they are watching us, but we are the ones watching them. Grace nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd just like he had taught her. She saw men in expensive suits shaking hands and women laughing behind lace fans. Everyone looked friendly, but she knew that behind those smiles, someone had tried to kill them at the safe house. She looked for the fiancé mask in the mirror and saw a woman who looked strong and calm, even though her heart was thumping like a drum. They moved toward the VIP section where Taejun's inner circle sat. There was Mr. Han, his oldest advisor, and Jean, his head of security. Both men had worked for Taejun for years. They greeted Grace with polite bows, but their eyes were cold. "The auction is about to start, boss," Jean said, checking his watch. "Everything is ready." Taejun took a glass of water from a passing tray and handed it to Grace. "Stay close to Jean," he told her. "I have to speak with the host for a moment. I will be right back." Grace felt a chill as he walked away. She watched his broad shoulders disappear into the crowd of businessmen. She felt exposed without him, like a bird out in the open. She turned to Jean, who was standing a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the entrance. "Are you okay, Miss Grace?" Jean asked. His voice was flat and professional. "I'm just a little nervous," she admitted. The lights dimmed, and the auction began. The room grew quiet as the announcer started calling out prices. Grace stepped back into a small, shadowed corner near a velvet curtain to get out of the way of the servers. She waited for Taejun to return, but the minutes dragged on. Suddenly, she saw Mr. Han lean over and whisper something into Jin's ear. Jin's face didn't change, but he gave a small, quick nod. It was a look Grace recognized, the same look Taejun had when he was making a move. But Taejun wasn't there. She saw Jin reach for his radio, but he didn't call for help. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, red pin shaped like a claw, the mark of the Iron Tigers. Grace's blood ran cold. The mole wasn't a stranger. It was the man Taejun trusted to protect them. She tried to move toward the light of the ballroom, but a heavy hand grabbed her arm. "Don't make a sound," Jean whispered. The kindness was gone from his voice.
It was sharp and mean now.
"If you scream, people in this room will die, and Taejun will be the first one." Grace looked around wildly for Taejun, but the crowd was too thick. She saw him across the room, blocked by a group of laughing men. He was looking for her, his eyes darting back and forth, but he couldn't see her in the dark shadows of the curtain. "You're a traitor," Grace hissed, trying to pull away. "I'm a businessman," Jean replied. "The Tigers pay better than loyalty ever did." Before she could draw a breath to scream, another man stepped out from behind the curtain. He smelled of tobacco and old sweat. A thick cloth was pressed over Grace's mouth. It smelled sweet and sick. She struggled, kicking out and clawing at the man's arms, but her vision began to blur. She saw Taejun finally turn toward her corner. For a split second, their eyes met across the crowded room. He saw the struggle. He saw the red pin in Jin's hand. His face transformed into a mask of pure rage, and he began to shove people aside to get to her. "Grace," he roared, his voice echoing over the sound of the auctioneer. But it was too late. The darkness pulled at her eyes, and her legs felt like lead. The men dragged her through a hidden service door behind the curtain. The last thing Grace saw before the world went black was Taejun reaching out for her, his hand just inches away from the gold of her dress, as the door slammed shut and locked from the other side. The world came back to Grace in waves of cold air and the smell of wet concrete. Her head throbbed, and her mouth felt dry, like it was filled with sand. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the bright ballroom anymore. She was in a dim, gray room with no windows. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging back and forth. It made the shadows on the walls look like they were reaching out to grab her. Grace tried to move her hands, but they were tied tightly to the back of a wooden chair. The rough rope bit into her skin. She looked down and saw her beautiful black dress was torn and dusty. The diamond necklace was gone. She felt a surge of fear that made her want to sob, but then she remembered Taejun's voice in the training room. "Fear's fine. Just never let them see it. She took a deep breath and forced her heart to slow down. She closed her eyes for a second and pictured Taejun's face. She thought about the weight of the gun he had placed in her hand and the way he told her she had a spine of steel. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness. She was a fiancée. She was a survivor. The heavy metal door at the end of the room creaked open.
2 men walked in.
One was the man with the tobacco smell from the auction. The other was the leader of the Iron Tigers, the man with the scar across his nose. He looked even meaner in the dim light. He dragged a chair across the floor and sat down directly in front of her. "You look a lot different than you did on the news, girl," the leader said. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Taejun thinks he can hide a witness by putting a ring on her finger. But a dress doesn't change what you saw in that restaurant." Grace didn't answer. She remembered the lesson about looking a killer in the eye. She lifted her chin and stared straight at him. She didn't blink. She didn't look at the floor. She made her eyes as cold and hard as the stone floors of Taejun's house. The leader frowned. He was expecting her to cry or beg for her life. "Where are the files?" he barked, slamming his hand down on his knee. "Taejun has a list of everyone we pay off. He gave them to you for safekeeping, didn't he?" "I don't know what you were talking about," Grace said. Her voice was thin, but it didn't shake. "I'm just his fiancé. We talk about flowers and music, not lists of criminals." The man with the tobacco smell stepped forward and slapped her across the face. Grace's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned, and she tasted blood in her mouth. For a moment, her vision went blurry, and the urge to scream was almost too much to handle. But she gritted her teeth. She thought about the scars on her arms. She had survived pain before. This was nothing new. She slowly turned her head back and looked at the leader again. She even let out a small, jagged laugh. "Is that all?" she asked. "I've had harder falls serving tables during a lunch rush." The leader's face turned bright red. He stood up, looking like he wanted to do much worse. "You think you're brave because you're wearing his jewelry? Taejun isn't coming for you. He's probably already found a new girl to play the part." "You're wrong," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "He knows exactly who the traitor is now. And if I know Taejun, he is already on his way. You should be worried about yourselves, not me." The leader opened his mouth to speak, but a loud bang echoed from somewhere deep in the building. A muffled alarm began to ring. The 2 men looked at the door, their faces turning pale. "Check the cameras," the leader shouted to the other man. He turned back to Grace, his hand reaching for a knife at his belt. "If he is here, you won't live to see him walk through that door." Grace didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on his, even as the blade glinted in the light. She had held her ground. She had used his lessons to stay strong. Now, she just had to hold on for a few more minutes. She knew the dragon was coming, and she knew that when he arrived, there would be no more talking. The building was an old factory on the edge of the docks, a place where the wind whistled through broken windows and the ocean smelled like salt and rust. Inside, the Iron Tigers were checking their guns and locking the doors. They thought they were safe behind thick walls and heavy locks. They were wrong. They didn't know that Taejun was no longer playing a game. The businessman was gone, and something much darker had taken his place. Suddenly, the front gates didn't just open, they flew off their hinges. A heavy black truck smashed through the entrance, crushing the crates and barrels in its path. Before the dust could even settle, the sound of gunfire ripped through the air. It wasn't the slow, careful shots of a guard. It was the fast, angry roar of a man who had nothing left to lose. Taejun stepped out of the truck. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. His white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, and his eyes looked like 2 pieces of burning coal. He didn't hide behind cover. He walked straight down the middle of the warehouse, his gun moving with terrifying speed. Every time a shadow moved, he fired.
He didn't miss.
He moved like a storm, cold and unstoppable, leaving a trail of broken glass and fallen men behind him. Jean, the traitor, stood at the top of a metal staircase. He was shaking as he pointed his weapon down at his former boss. "Stop right there, Taejun. I'll kill her. I swear I'll do it." Taejun didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He looked up at Jean, and his face was so terrifying that the younger man's hand began to wobble. "You had my trust, Jean," Tae-jun said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried over the sound of the alarms like a death sentence. "You had my money, but you touched what belongs to me. That is a debt you cannot pay with gold." Jean fired a shot, but it went wide, hitting a metal pillar. Tae-jun didn't even flinch. He raised his own gun and fired once. The bullet hit Jin's shoulder, sending him tumbling down the stairs. Tae-jun didn't kill him, not yet. He walked past the groaning traitor without even looking down, his eyes fixed on the heavy metal door at the end of the hall where Grace was being held. The leader of the Tigers met him at the door, holding a knife to Grace's throat. Grace was pale, her face bruised from the slap, but when she saw Tae-jun, she didn't scream. She remembered his lessons. She stayed still, her eyes locked on his. "One more step and she dies," the leader yelled. He was sweating, his back pressed against the door. Tae-jun stopped. He stood 10 feet away, his gun lowered but his gaze fixed on the man's heart. "Look around you," Tae-jun said softly. "My men are outside. This building is surrounded. I have already ordered my people to set the lower floors on fire. In 10 minutes, this whole place will be nothing but ash." The leader's eyes went wide. "You're crazy. You'll burn her too." "I would burn this entire city to the ground to get her back," Tae-jun replied. There was no lie in his voice. It was the simplest truth he had ever spoken. "But you won't be here to see the fire. You have 5 seconds to let her go." The leader looked at Tae-jun's face and saw a monster. He saw a man who had crossed a line and would never come back. His hand began to shake so much that the knife nicked Grace's skin. In that second of hesitation, Grace remembered her training. She didn't wait for Tae-jun to save her. She slammed her elbow back into the leader's stomach and dropped to the floor just like they had practiced. Tae-jun's gun barked twice. The leader fell back against the door, the knife clattering to the ground. Before the man could even hit the floor, Tae-jun was there. He didn't look at the fallen enemy. He reached down and scooped Grace up into his arms. He held her so tight it was hard for her to breathe, but she didn't mind. She buried her face in his neck, smelling the smoke and the gunpowder that now clung to him. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. His heart was hammering against her chest, fast and wild. "I've got you." As they walked out of the burning building, the orange flames began to lick at the walls. Tae-jun didn't look back at the millions of dollars worth of property or the men he had defeated. He only looked at the girl in his arms. The world outside watched in shock as the powerful Nam Tae-jun carried a simple waitress through the smoke, wondering just how far he would go next time. For Grace, the answer was clear. He would burn the world for her, and he wouldn't even blink. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt small or worthless or forgotten, I want you to know something. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. If you enjoyed this journey with me, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. People who need to hear them. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment where you'd stood up for yourself? Where you finally said enough? I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories. And if you want more stories about survival, strength, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I share new stories every week.